Hello everybody, Matthew with Medical Device Academy here. And a few days ago I promised a longer video looking at a recall that involved both software and human factors engineering. If you don't remember, it looked something like that. And then I checked my email and I found the perfect real-world example of why the FDA cares so much about the overlap between software and human factors engineering. But anyway, here I am with that longer video. Okay, so a couple of things that changed from last time is the FDA has since issued the correction from the last recall we were discussing. But that's not why I'm showing you guys my inbox again, because I wanted to show you guys another correction. Since I made that short, before I could get around to making this long video, the FDA has issued an alert for a correction directly related to usability again. And in this one, the correction is an update to the use instructions. And we know in human factors engineering, everything in the instructions for use is a risk mitigation at the level of information related to safety. The FDA use a tiered approach where they want you to design the risk away. If you can't do that, warnings and alarms. And if you can't do that, then you can always add information related to safety, but it's preferred to design things away rather than just slap a warning in your IFU. So I can't make these videos fast enough to keep up with what's actually happening with the FDA. But anyway, we're talking about usability. I always get excited when I have examples of usability, in the wild, so to speak. But we're going to go back to our potential use error where the recall was issued because if the user hits the on-screen buttons too fast, it could force a system shutdown. But when we ran over it last time in the short video, I wasn't entirely sure that it was usability related, but did it actually meet the strict definition of a use error? So first things first, let's go define a use error. Now to do that, we're going to look at the FDA's 2016 usability guidance. That one right there. Got it. Use error 3.9, page 3. A use error, according to FDA guidance, is a user action or lack of action that was different from that expected by the manufacturer and caused a result that was 1, different from the result expected by the user, and 2, was not caused solely by device failure, and 3, did or could result in harm. But while we're here, we should take a peek at what I consider to be a wild card sometimes, and that is abnormal use. And that's an intentional act or intentional omission of an act that reflects volitive or reckless use or sabotage beyond reasonable means of risk mitigation or control through design of the user interface. We look at the decision tree for use error or abnormal use. Now, I saw down here that the decision tree itself rings in at 1,009 words. So just for giggles, we have a work instruction that includes examples and diagrams and process flows and all sorts of extra things for how you would actually fill this out if you were doing it. And I wanted to see the size comparison. And our instructions for use actually roll in at 3,315 words total. Okay, so to fill this out, my name is Matthew. My title is Nobody. That's what I am. Let's apply a signature. We can pretend that we are doing this in real life. I just signed it with my pen. We're going to put a date and a time. It's that day. What time is it? 8:15 p.m. Exciting stuff. Now, to the important things. The summary of the issue is when the user presses the on-screen buttons too fast, the system forces a sudden restart. Okay, that's just what happens. Push the buttons too quick, system restarts. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for this to happen. And in order to determine a full root cause, we'd have to be filling out other paperwork. And to find a formal statement of a root cause, we might be doing a 5 why analysis. But for right now, we're just going to call this inconclusive, because I don't know why this is happening. This could be a mismatch between performance specifications and user needs. It could be a whole bunch of things. So, in order to work through the elements of this offense, in case anybody's been having to take their criminal law classes lately, we need to know if there was an action or a lack of action made by the user. Yes, there was an action. User pressing the on-screen buttons quickly. Okay, so yes. Because the answer was yes, we are going to move on to the next question. Was the action or lack of action different from what was expected by the manufacturer? Now, the user action for something that could be used in real life on real patients, perhaps in an emergency setting, rapidly pressing buttons or entering commands or backing out of something or confirming options, all that sort of stuff. Would it be unexpected that a user might hit buttons fast? I think the answer to that is this behavior probably isn't unexpected. We wouldn't expect everybody to be smashing those buttons at light speed, but occasionally the need for a user to hit buttons fast is realistically, it's a reasonable expectation. So we're going to hit was the action different? No, these... Gosh, these are crazy sizes, but we're just gonna say no. So at least the occasional user could reasonably be expected to hit buttons fast. Example, emergency use, right? And maybe in the ER. Did it cause a result that was different than expected by the user? I think this one is an easy yes. My formatting is a mess. The user would not reasonably expect these actions to force a sudden system restart. Right, they're hitting the back button, they're confirming things, they're making selections, switching menus or whatever. Now, this caused solely by device failure. And this is my big question mark. It's a machine. It takes its inputs and generates output. There's no human error involved in the function of a computer. There could be error in the programming. There could be error in user inputs. But the machine itself, it does what the machine does. This is likely something that nobody knew about before. I would like to think that devices aren't just thrown out into the wild with bugs that could hurt people. But is a software bug a failure of the device? And is that the only reason we do destructive testing of the device involved? We might find, if this is a touchscreen operation, that perhaps there was an issue with the way that the touchscreen was accepting user inputs, commands, right? If I'm hitting buttons crazy, maybe it's thinking I'm hitting more inputs than I'm actually touching. Okay, yeah, sure. That was caused solely by a device failure. Yeah, we'll hit yes and we'll kill the investigation here. This is not going to be a use error. It's a device failure issue. So while I ponder this, we're going to hop over to the next question. And that's going to be, did it or could it result in harm? And this one is an immediate yes, because it's the subject of an FDA recall. And they specify interruption. The text is red. Interruptions in therapy, increase in... Now I gotta remember, was it venous pressure, arterial pressure, vessel pressure, increase in some kind of pressure? And I think we were looking at potential catastrophic results. I spelled things wrong, we're gonna click that there. So, it's the only cause by device failure. Bruh. Because part of this requires rapid user inputs. This doesn't happen unless it's in relation to how quickly the user is hitting the on-screen command buttons. So is it solely, is there, is it 99.9% of device failure and 0.1% user interactions? That one I think is plausible because it's 100%. So the correction to this is a change in the design of the device. They're updating software revisions. They're pushing a patch to fix this. Could you add an alarm? Maybe. A warning pop-up. Says, whoa, slow down, partner. And is there information related to safety about this? Well, we could just slap a warning in the IFU that says, hey, push buttons too fast. The whole system's going to restart. Did I do all this and not start recording? I could have swore that I started recording. I think it's possible to blame this entirely on device failure. And that's because the device is failing to process the perfectly reasonable user interactions. Like, we don't have any conceptualization of how rapidly these commands are being entered, but this isn't a Dance Dance Revolution board. This is a touch screen. And because I think you could realistically, maybe in the ER, maybe in an operating theater, there are emergency situations where you could be expected to make entries quickly. So rapidly pushing buttons, that's not an unreasonably expected interaction with the device user interface from the user, and the device is failing to process this reasonable interaction. Not that this is the way it's always being used, but that there are situations within normal use of the device that this may occur. The only reason this is happening is because the device is failing to process user inputs appropriately. The root of the issue here isn't that the user is hitting buttons too fast. The root of the issue is that the device can't handle when the user hits buttons quickly. User interaction has exposed a device defect. The device failure is the sole cause of this issue. What makes me feel better about this overall thing is that we have two arguments to make if we're looking at providing a rationale to the FDA. So if this were a court of law, I think the conclusion that we're going to come to is that this does not meet the elements of the offense required for the charge. So was there an action or lack of an action? Yes. The user was pressing the on-screen buttons quickly, but that was the action that the user was taking. Now, was that action different from what was expected by the manufacturer? And to that we answered no. And that's because it could at least reasonably be expected that there are some occasions a healthcare provider would need to move quickly. Did this cause a result different than that expected by the user? For that we said yes. The user shouldn't reasonably think that the device would restart in these conditions. Now, was this caused solely by device failure? Now, waffled a little bit on this one, but I think we decided on a no. It's the intended user, intended use environment, reasonable actions. The cause is the device failing to appropriately accommodate or process reasonable user interactions. Could it have resulted in harm? Yes, it could have. The harms were listed in the recall. I'm not sure if any actually occurred specifically, but the potential for that happening is there. And that is the barrier needed, is just could it have caused harm? Which on our decision tree, we have a final score of 3 out of 5. In order to call this a use error, we need to be able to confidently say yes to all 5. So the score of 3 out of 5, we're going to have to say this was related to human factors, but not specifically itself a use error. So thank you, come again, not guilty. And if I haven't scared you away yet, please subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of weird that I think of.